Hello and welcome to the second chapter of our Infectio project. In this part we're going to apply what we learned in the first section to our model and the actual scene that we want it to occur on. So that's our skull scene. If we look at our scene that we've got here, we've got this Infectio modifier and it's infecting particles using these two groups. It's using the particle color. Here we go. And it's infecting. If I press play, you'll see. Infects the particles depending on their color and incubation and that kind of stuff. And we're also driving some things with the mapping. If you notice, I haven't used a system object. And the reason for that sometimes is that I find just bashing a scene together is you know, it keeps things nice and simple. If you've only got a few objects, there's not much reason to have a system object. However, we're going to start ramping up the number of sort of things we're going to have in the scene, so I am now going to want to use a system object. So I can either just search that, or I could go to X-Particles, and there's this thing called system sort. And this will literally grab any X-Particles objects that are currently in the scene and throw them into a system and organize them depending on what type of object they are. Now, forewarning, that doesn't drag in things that are not XP objects. So imagine you have a child object, you know, like an XP object that's a child of another thing. It'll drag it out. So you want to be a bit cautious with using it, but it's a great time saver. Quickly organize your scene, one hit, and it's done. And we're going to call this system, I'm going to call it slime mold. And that's because my reference is slime mold. It's this kind of gross yellowy, well, it depends what kind of slime mold. It's just because it looks disgusting. I think it kind of appeal to me in a horrible way. So it's going to be yellow. So let's actually make the system yellow. I like to do things like that, just a bit more intuitive. And that's all working fine. I'm going to do my usual thing, which is in the XP system, I'm going to turn these two options on, and I'm going to turn the icon off. And that's just, I always do that whenever I set up a new scene or a new system. If I don't want the systems talking to each other, this is going to be an isolated system from the others, always check those on. And it's in the emitter that is just toggling these two options on. So all that's doing is all the emitters that are inside this system will suddenly have these checked on. So if I ran that, I'll just demonstrate quickly because this is a kind of important. Can you see this is only modifiers in the same system? If I check this on now or off now, and I put this in here, and I'm looking here, it's these are checked on, but actually it's toggled. These are still off, so it's not an active parameter. So you might want to toggle them on and off again, off and on again, I should say, and jump back in, and you'll see that those are now checked on. So that's just a bit of a warning, just in case that doesn't work. But brilliant! I love the system sort, and having systems is very good for organization. And we're going to be using questions and stuff in a bit as well. So. Okay, now let's take a look at what we're going to do to our scene here. So let me just hide this slime mold system. In fact, I'm going to just turn it off for now and hide it. And we've got our plane here, but we need to prepare the geometry of the scene. So currently these are separate objects. So if I ran our simulation on these right now, we'd have infection going along. In fact, let's just test that out. Let's convert our scene so that it's utilizing a connect object to group things up and reference this plane object. So I'm going to actually create a connect object. I'm going to turn world off. You don't need that on when you're doing this kind of grouping operation. Drop that in there, and we transfer our materials to the top to the connect object, and then that just means that our materials are now assigned up here. And what we want to do is we want to make sure that the connect is now what the emitter is referencing. So we jump to the emitter, go to the emitter tab, and just drag the connect in instead of the plane. Now whatever is a child of this will become the emission surface. And we could change this to connect the object chain, but it's already kind of being done by this connect object, so it shouldn't need to do that. And we can change the name, just to be consistent later on. Bit more intuitive. There we go. Let's just double check that's still working. Nice. So now when we swap out those materials, they should be set there nicely. Okay. let's grab our skull and mandible. So this is like, I just wanted to demonstrate that two separate objects. If I hide this here, throw these in together. Now, if I press play now, I don't think anything's going to happen because this, for starters, these materials don't have UVs on them. Also, these objects don't even have a UV on them. So you might discover this kind of problem when you bring in scan geometry and things like that. Sometimes they won't have any UVW at all. If I turn that off and I drop, let's grab our Biohazard 2 material and just use this to line things up. Let's assign it to the skull up there. Let's set it to, oh, it's not showing because if you go to the skull object and the mandible object, I've got use color on just so that I could see that they were separate objects. I'm going to put it into automatic mode. And you can see we're actually we're assigning that material now. It's a spherical projection. Let's change it to flat. Let's increase the size. Now let's bring the ground plane in as well, actually. Oh, I should have left those in there. So if you've dragged those out, make sure you leave them in there. I want to do this on duplicate, so I'm going to hold Control as I drag that, bring it out. There we go. Now, I'm going to assign this to the ground plane as well. And these are all, if I check their zeroing points, they'll all be different. So I need to be a bit careful where the material is. But that's fine. So let's put that over the face here. That's kind of interesting looking. This is probably what we're going to do in the final one, actually. If I drag it onto the mandible, you'll see it'll offset to a different location. It's actually fine because it's in the same plane. But let's turn that off anyway. Let's do right click. Once you've kind of got it in position, let's duplicate it to the ground plane as well. And oh, the ground plane has its use color active. And let's do that. This is only a demonstration right here. So we're only lining this texture up and generating a UV from that. So I'm going to delete that one. And then the mandible. And then if I select all of them and then I right click, once I've got them into position and I hit generate UV coordinates, we've now got UVs that we can utilize to apply textures to our object. Very crude, but they'll work. And I'll demonstrate. That should actually show. So if I create a new material, some noise, apply that, and then you can see now it's tiling horrendously. We're not going to worry too much about that because the focus area is going to be in the center here. But the main thing I wanted to demonstrate right now is, well, let's first of all reduce down the, let's make it contrasted. I just want to demonstrate that Infectio will struggle to transfer across to surfaces. Well, it won't struggle, it won't look particularly good because it'll start going under the surface. And you see we've got geometry under the surface. It'll actually infect all those particles as well. So let's jump into our emitter. Let's see what's giving it its color is this XP color modifier. So let's drag that in. That's doing fine. It's doing change on birth only. And oh, interestingly, that's still black. Oh, there we go. So that's now our particles that we're going to be working with. And you can see, obviously, it's tiled away over there. Now, I'm not sure if I might be able to reduce that, but that's fine. Let's leave it for now. And what we're going to do with this is we're going to say to the Infectio is to infect different areas. Let's just grab one of these seed objects. Oops, not the texture mode. There we go, position mode. And let's make that large so it can grab a bunch of things. Press play and it should start infecting things. Yep. Now if I display our object here, we can see it's moving up and it is working. It's actually transferring across surfaces, coming down here, across here. That's all fine, but it's not contiguous. So what that means is it's not, you know, over here we're not able to jump the gap essentially, and it's going under the object. So you can see we're getting infections under the object. It's just not very efficient, and it's a huge surface. We're using too many particles, and it's just a bit of a mess. So the whole point of what I'm saying here is that we need to retopologize or combine these objects and mesh them together. So what we can do is we can use an OpenVDB or any kind of volume workflow for this actually. So let's turn off the slime mold. Let's turn off our connect for now. And I'm just actually going to delete those objects that we just tweaked around with because we're going to come up with a totally new object and they'll require new UVs anyway. So let's grab our geometry. Let's drag it out of the hierarchy here. And let's now grab an OpenVDBMesher. OVDBMesher. And let's just start with the skull. So if I make these children, so I'm actually going to make duplicates again. And you can see it creates a mesh of the object straight away. If I drop another one in, it's going to mesh that one as well. I'm going to hide that original geometry for now. And, oh, why are we still, oh, because up here, we've got a duplicate of the whole thing. Delete that, don't need that anymore. And you can see here, we've got actually a pretty nice representation, a volumetric representation of our skull. But we want to combine it with the ground as well. So, but the ground itself, if I duplicate that out and put it above our mesher, that is really dense. It's a sculpted mesh and it's a bit large. So what we want to do is we actually want to restrict the area that it's going to be, and then we need to turn it into a 3D solid object so that we can turn it into a volume. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to select a large area of particles in the center here. And I'm just going to use the this brush, and you can scale it up. There we go. Or you could just use the radius here. There's a shortcut. Everyone has different ones for that though. And we don't need to be much larger than this. This is not going to be visible to us at all. It's going to be essentially, and we might even clip it even more once it's created. I need to turn on only select visible elements. So I'm just going to do that again. This time, I'm just going to select it there. And then I'm going to invert. Now this is just to make the volume operation a bit lighter and quicker. Oh, I might want to actually grab in a bit more of this area around here that has some detail. Your mileage may vary. If you've got a different scene, just make sure that all the objects are continuous like this. Now I'm going to invert, so UI is the shortcut for that. That's just invert selection. And then I'm going to hit backspace. Now in R20, I think, and up, it optimizes as well, so it deletes the points as well. That's very handy. Now I can now extrude this down to make it 3D, because currently it's just a 2D plane. And I'm just going to grab the whole thing. I'm going to hit D for extrude. And create caps is on. And then I'm just going to do a 0 offset. The reason for that is I don't want the polys to move anywhere other than where they are right now. And then I'm just going to move them down in Z. Oh, sorry, in Y. So new transform. And then I can just grab this. So if I go to move mode, press E, drag that down a bit. Then I'm going to press T for scale, and then I'm just going to scale down in Y, and I'm going to hold Shift so it snaps to the 0%. And you can see we haven't quite got that right. Drag it down a bit further. Perfect. And this essentially now is our cutout island that we're going to volumize. So I'm going to drag that into our OpenVDBMesher. There we go. And because it's quite a few polys, it can take a second. That was very quick. No problem. But you'll see the representation is pretty good, but it's got some sort of gnarly parts to it. It's not perfect, like the teeth are missing and things like that. So if I display our original geometry here, you can see our teeth aren't actually being represented very well. And that's because the voxel size is a little too large. So I think we can go to at least half of that. There we go. We're half. That's perfect. Well, actually, let's go for... because we're going to reduce the polys in a poly reduction workflow as well. So it could go all the way down to 1 perhaps. And you see there the teeth get a much better representation. Now we might have some fixing to do, because sometimes in poly reduction operations these areas get sort of errors and things, but we can do that with Mesh Checker in a minute. Now I'm pretty happy with that, so I'm going to current state to object it. And all you need to do, you could either press C, but pressing C will actually get rid of this OpenVDBMesher entirely, so you might not want to do that. So I right click, current state to object, it will then mesh it and make a new object. And I'm going to just turn that one off and hide it. And I could just call this geometry mesh prep, whatever you want to call that. And then we've always got that later on if we need to reference it and use those same settings again for another piece of geometry. You could delete it from the scene. I wouldn't recommend that, but yeah. So, okay, we've got this piece of geometry. Now, it's three-dimensional. We don't need it to be like a solid mesh, if that makes sense. Like, if you look inside, we actually have these sort of 3D areas. We even have this, like, floating island here that intercepted. We don't need that at all. We just want one contiguous surface that our particles can roll up, and that's exactly what we've got here. So now they're connected, and the particles can just roll up that and infect the whole area. What we we don't actually need anything below a certain point. So we could select everything below this point and delete it. And that's quite easy to do. So let's do that. So let's go into one of the side views or front view. And I'm going to change to a rectangular selection. And I'm going to leave it with only select visible elements off. And I'm going to drag just the bottom half here. I want to be a bit careful I don't grab this. You see that low hanging area there. And you'll see that. Now, we could even bring it back even further. We could actually come up to somewhere like here. So you could do something like this as well. So I'm just giving you a few different options here. Go to your live selection tool, make it much smaller. And you could just manually go around like this because we've got enough area to play with. So it's just a little trickier, I find, to get these selections. I'm using a Wacom, so it's fairly easy. And if I let go, I can just hold Shift if I want to carry on selecting. There we go. And now I'm going to use what is called the selection fill to isolate the area up this area here. So if I press U and F in sequence, you'll see that I can do this. I can just select the top part there. The advantage of this is that if I zoom into here and I go inside the mesh again, you'll see that it's excluded the parts that weren't connected. So we filtered out any bits that are kind of floating and would cause an issue later on. So we need to invert the selection, so U and I, and we're just going to press backspace to delete those. And we should start to see the simulation surface kind of forming here. One thing I like to do before I do a mesh reduction or poly reduction on this is I like to smooth out the edge. And it's not entirely necessary, but if you hit U and Q, you'll get this outline selection and it'll just select the outline of a polygon island. So anywhere there's outlines that aren't connected to another polygon, it will select those. And what we can do is we can smooth those out with a smooth brush. So if you hit the keys M and then C, this is called the brush. And in default, it's in smear mode. I want it in smooth mode. And then you can just run it around the surface. We could actually increase the strength beyond 100%, just so that it makes the operation a bit quicker. And the bigger the polygons are, actually, the quicker this will be. But these are tiny, so it's a little bit of a slower operation. And this just helps. I do this because when you're reducing the mesh, I don't want it to create too many polygons at the edge here. And we'll probably delete them out anyway. I'm just being a bit cautious. There we go. So that's one operation done. And let's just throw this inside a poly reduce object. So you can see this poly reduction object. I'm going to hold Alt while I have my OVDBMesher selected. And we've done this operation in another project. We actually did it in the Ivy one, probably another one as well. But this is a really useful workflow to reduce polygons down and get a really efficient surface for the particles to crawl all over. So you can see the poly, if you look down the bottom left corner, there's a progress of how quickly it's going to reduce the mesh. That actually jumped quite quickly towards the end there. And you can see we're getting quite a dense mesh now. So even though we've reduced it by 90%, there's still a ton of polygons there. So what we do is we just bump the strength up. And because it's done most of the pre-meshing operations, it tends not to have to recalculate. Sometimes it does, but I'm just going to bump it a bit more. Let's go 99. And you can also set the triangle count here if you look down here. That's actually quite high at the moment, so let me just drop it down. Yeah, that's really, really high at the moment. So I might just, I might make this one editable. So press C and then bring it out. And then I'm going to reduce it again. So I'm actually going to run that operation again. You might need to do that. Usually it works with the percentage over here. There we go, reduction strength. Now, I'll tell you what might be happening here is actually we're failing because there are some degenerate polygons. Now, what does that mean? Well, there's something to do. I mentioned it earlier, but we didn't actually do that step. So if you hit Shift M and go to Modeling Settings, and then at the last tab here, we've got this thing called Mesh Checking. If we activate this, it's going to be a bit slow to start with. Yeah, I can see what's going on here. So if I turn off complex poles, edge points, isolated polys, we don't need any of that. What I tend to be looking at this stage are these things here. So the boundary edges, that's not a problem. That's the those edges that don't connect to another polygon. They have 1 or 2 connections that aren't there, so we can turn the boundary edges off. But this is the 2 that are going to be important in mesh operations: non-manifold and bad polygons. Now, non-manifold is quite an exotically weird sort of scenario where a polygon is sharing 3 sides that it shouldn't be. So I've selected them, so I've hit select over here, and we're in edge mode, but I can't see them. So I need to go into a wireframe. So I could go up here and just go display and just go to lines, and I can't see them at all. Now this is a scenario I've had a few times where you're trying to find the problem area, and obviously it's 4 edges, so they could be spread across a certain area. Now I caught a glimpse of them down here, but if you can't find them, there's a little trick we can do. If you hit Shift V and you go to your view here, there's actually this select edge size, and considering I've just selected them, they'll actually be somewhere over here. So remember that default is 2 if you right click and go reset to default. But if I do the maximum of 10, you can see they're much clearer and you can find them. There we go. So I'm going to hit 2. Now, what are these? If I zoom right into them, let's go to, I've gone to flat shaded mode. And if you're clipping like this with the camera, you can always go to the project settings, Control D, and you can see here the view clipping. Just change it to small, and it just means that you can get in closer to your mesh. Now you can see these 2 polys are connecting across, all of these polys are connecting across this weird bridge, and that's a problem. So what we could just do is if I hit Shift M and I select those, I could just delete them. So I just press backspace. Oops, hang on. There we go. Select those. And just make sure we're in that right area. If I press backspace, it's actually just deleted those edges. And it deleted the ones up the top, but didn't delete these ones. So select them again. Delete those as well. And now we don't have any more non-manifold edges, but we do have gaps in our mesh. So let's turn on boundary edges again. And you can see that's where our boundaries are. And we can just seal these up using some classic operations. But right now, you can see that we've got a problem where it's branching across, and to be honest, I'm just going to delete these polygons. This is just a bit of mesh cleanup that if you're finding any of your mesh operations are failing, this is a very likely candidate. And it's pretty rare. You might have it, but I think it's worth me showing you just so that if it happens to you, that we can get out of that scenario. So I'm just deleting these polys here, and I'm trying to get to an area where I can just seal them off with one operation, which is close polygon hole. There we go. You can see I've kind of got rid of that gap. If we zoom out, this is in the teeth area, and I mentioned it might be a problem, and it was. In my experience, is where you're getting lots of edges meeting is where the problems. So if I hit MD, that's going to bring up the close polygon hole operation. I'm going to do that. Click on that one, and it'll close that one up. I'm going to actually make sure it's going to create triangles or quads. Wait till it highlights. There we go. Close that one up. And then this last one here. Let's just go to Shift M again. And our boundary edges, there's loads, but there are no more there aren't any more here. So if I zoom back out, remember this doesn't have to be an absolutely perfect representation of the skull. It just has to be enough that we can run our particles over it, and then we'll hide this mesh and be displaying our nice, pretty original meshes. So this OVDBMesher now should work better in the poly reduce object, hopefully, and it's running its operation now. Before it wasn't even bothering running it because we obviously went a bit too far. So with those non-manifold edges, taking a few seconds, it does a pre-processing stage, and then once it's pre-processed, you can actually drag these sliders within reason, and then it'll actually just it'll remember the pre-processing it had done. And there we go, coming up. It's 1.3 million polygons, so obviously that's very dense. The lower the better, but obviously we can't go too low, otherwise we'll lose detail in our mesh. And there we go, now it's actually done a proper reduction operation. And you can see it's maintaining the boundary edges, and that's because we've got this preserve 3D boundaries on. And that's absolutely fine, we'll probably crop in a bit to that. And if I show our original geometry, let's go to one of these modes, and you can see it's overlapping pretty much perfectly, or at least accurately enough. And if I Hide our original geometry. Now I think we can even afford to leave that a little higher so it's more accurate. So let's drop it down to something like that. There we go. I'm pretty happy with that. And now let's current state to object that. Or we could just right click and current state. Oh, sorry, press C and make editable. There we go. It leaves a null, so Shift G will ungroup it. And there we go. So this is going to be our simulation surface. And it's our skull scene. And this is what we're going to drop into the connect object. There we go. And like I said, we could clean up those edges where there's just more polys than we need, but it's really unnecessary at this point. We've done lots of optimizing. If you hit Shift M, turn our mesh checking off because we don't need that anymore. That's processing we don't need to waste. And there we go. Now we have a proper surface that our particles can reference. Okay. So probably a good time to save. Probably always is a good time to save is the answer to that one. Let's turn our simulation back on. And if you recall, we had to create a UV for this surface, but let's see if it actually applies any particles. Yes, it does. But there's no UV, so we're going to have to create a UV. Let's turn our connect object off. Let's throw our texture on here. Go into texture mode over here. Hit flat. And then we just rotate it until we're happy. Now I want this to basically behave like a projection that will probably line up with the camera at the end. And this is what's going to be infected. This is the area we're going to infect. So this is all going to be about scaling it to the right sort of size and position and stuff like that. Your mileage may vary and you might have a sort of slightly different creative idea than this, but I'm going to use this as my template. And if I move across, you can see it stretches down the sides. That's not going to be too much of a problem. But if you've got noises, they might stretch to like a line, like a long line down the side. This is essentially a very crude UV operation, but it's going to work for us. I'm going to turn off tiling because I don't want it on those areas. I'm going to make it a little larger because it's currently... Oh no, actually, let's make it a bit smaller. It's just so it's around the skull itself. There. That's going to give us some interesting surfaces that the particles can sort of infect along, but also maintain the shapes. When we come back out here, it's going to be aligned like a projection. Cool. So if I right click and I go generate UVW, that should now generate the UVW. I'm going to delete that texture tag. There we go. And that's the noise using the UVW. And I can change the projection of this later on as well using flats and things like that. So if I hide this connect object, we can now see that we are projecting our shader onto here, and along goes our mold, propagating along. Obviously, we're going to change the noise and things like that. So let's perhaps tweak that. It is tiling, so make sure it's not tiling. Ah, well, actually, that's this one. Yeah, that's that's only for the emission one there. So we'll probably want to delete any tiling that's going on. If I open this up, you'll see that's our UV look. And if I jump to one of these textures, have I got these in flat mode? Let's do it in flat mode. Now that we've got this texture assigned, we can actually utilize the normal ways of assigning materials. So let's just test that out. Let me move that around, and you can see we're kind of projecting it. And each time I rewind to 0 and play again, we're getting a new shader. Now, obviously, you'll probably want to preview that. So there we go. Let's preview that. And I can turn off the luminance channel so we can see it nice and clearly. There we go. And then, obviously, depending on how you want to assign this, we can work that out, no problem. So I'm just going to turn the color off at the moment and just see if that works. There we go. You can see the particle color is now green. And interestingly, it's not fixing that tiling, so we might have to do something to fix that. We could use just a cheat way of doing that. We could scale this up, and we could have like a fading out on the edges and that kind of thing, but we'll work it out. I think actually one way to solve it would be to just kill off these particles that are outside this boundary. So we could just use a kill object modifier. So let's do that actually. Let's go to modifiers, control modifiers, kill. And you'll see we get this bounds. And essentially anything in the default operation, anything outside the volume, anything outside the bounds will be killed. And if I pull this down here, you can see that. Now I could use some geometry as well if we wanted it to be much more accurate. But since it's a texture that's causing this, I can just do that. Now, say we ever had particles that were going to move outside of this system now, outside of this box, and we only wanted it to stop them from emitting at the very first frame, you can actually set that in the kill modifier to only born. So it'll only operate on the born particles. And there we go. You can see now it's actually emitting. Oh, let's turn our color back on. Actually, we didn't need to turn that off. There we go. You can see now it's only emitting in the area. It's killing off the particles on the outside. And let's hide that geometry. Boom. There we go. Okay, I'm really liking how this is starting to look. Let's throw that noise back on there. And we'll work out things like which one of these we're going to use, which one of the seed objects. I think I'm just going to drop them back down to, let's reset them to defaults. Let's put that there. There we go. And let's drop that down below there. So there we go. So did you notice something there? When I had the Infectio object above the color modifier, it's actually, the color is not getting assigned in this threshold, this seed area here. So to fix that, it's being overridden by the color modifier. We need to drop that below the Infectio. There we go. Sorry, the Infectio below the XP color, and it'll fix that problem. So sometimes modifier order is important. Not always, but depending on what they're doing, you should just be a bit aware of that. So this is looking pretty interesting. So let's now assign a few more of these seed objects. Let's put our actual geometry, turn that on so we can see it. There we go. Now we're currently seeing the, let's change these from automatic to on again. There we go. Just want to get a better idea of how the skull looks with this on. And the position of that's a bit messy, so let's go back to that. And let's display that again. I want it to come up quite high up. There we go. Maybe this is our last moment of where we see it, and I want to orient it pretty much square onto the camera. We could use a projection mode here, but I'm quite happy to eyeball it. And this is essentially where our camera will end up at the end. I just want it to be kind of something obscure to start with. We don't know quite what's going on, but it's propagating across this shape that it's like our mask if you think about it. And then if I just hide that again, let's just test that out. Nice. And it's spreading. Perfect. Now that's not even that many particles as well. I think we could really crank this up. Maybe not too far, because you don't want to go too dense too quickly, otherwise your simulation will slow down quite significantly. But let's try a couple 100,000 this time, and let's add a few more seed objects. So I do want it to kind of start in sort of specific areas. Oh, I actually do need to see that. There we go. That's interesting actually. So if I have it on the eye over here, I might want to tweak that texture some more, just so that we get more, you know, maybe across the eyebrows a bit. Maybe we center this texture over the top of that. So let's grab that texture. Let's move the camera up a bit. I want to be a bit steeper. Let's orient the texture to the camera pretty much. Let's bring it up. Let's go back to the beginning here and let's hide our original geometry. You find yourself jumping around the scene quite a bit like this. So there we go. We can see this. Now, the skull itself is a bit hard to see, obviously, because we've got this black texture. If you want to be able to see stuff underneath, you could always just drop the opacity of this just temporarily whilst you do that. Helps you line it up. Maybe we have the center of the biohazard on the actual nose. That might be quite cool. How about that nearly leaving the top of the head, but not quite. And then the nose just has that slight. If I go a bit steeper. Yeah, I quite like that. And then you've got this kind of framing of the mouth and stuff like that. Yeah, if you're using a different texture here, obviously that'll suit your scenario. I think that's going to work for mine. Let's go to the mix strength back up. Let's just press play. Oh, let's hide our geometry. Press play to test. That's pretty cool. If you notice here, it's struggling to jump up the mandible, but it will get there eventually. And across it goes. We'll definitely have a play with the settings to see how dense this noise is and stuff like that as well. So the noise might need scaling down, or maybe I change the type of noise and stuff like that. Let's actually show the mesh again. Go back to the beginning. And let's jump into our XP noise that we have here. And let's make this, well, let's change the seed a bit. Let's just do some random numbers. Let's do 20% in there. And I mean, your mileage may vary, like I said, depending on the scale of your scene, all that kind of stuff. Actually, it's not updating the preview. So let's just play. Oh, is it referencing that? It is referencing that noise, isn't it? I was just double checking that is, yeah, okay. Because this texture actually is not the one that's assigning the color for the, that's the one that's filtering. Oh, that's nice. There you go. You see, we're getting that noisy edge there. It's kind of propagating across, and I'm restricting this obviously to this very accurate. Well, I say accurate, very fine area of a logo, but you could be tweaking this all the way to all sorts of different stuff. Can you notice that we're also, because we're projecting this through with a texture that's on the back side of the object as well? We can of course kill those off if we needed. I don't think that's going to be too necessary. And let's view it without the original particles on. So let's go to the emitter, display tab, change it from squares to none. Let's go back to the beginning, and let's put the geometry on. And now we're starting to see what's going on. So we're propagating across the mesh. Let's increase the scale of them actually whilst we're here, so we can see nice and clear. Propagating across the mesh. Like I said though, we're going to need some more seed objects, otherwise it'll take forever, and even the center logo part will actually not be, it won't be got at all. So let's place a few of these in different spots. Okay, so let's create a different seed object here. Oh, let's hide our original geometry here. Now what we could do is we could turn snapping on. So if I jump over here to the snapping, I could undock that. I tend to have shortcuts for these, but if you enable snap, and I'm going to turn vertex snap off, but polygon snap on, and I've already duplicated one here by control dragging, so I need to make sure I'm in model mode. And let's just make sure that we basically have points where it's gonna hit our logo and it's gonna come across. So there we go. Over there, and then if I drag that across there, pull that across there, and then I can do this, put that in the corner there. And then we're going to run that simulation in a second. There we go. I'm just putting them in places where they're going to trigger the animation. And I think we'll call that enough. Let's press play and see what happens. Okay, so it's propagating across the surface quite nicely. Now looking at the timing, we're into 3 seconds now because it's 30 FPS this scene. So I think I probably want them sort of, I think this is probably a pretty good rate. And we can see which bits have not got enough particles or need an encouraging to arrive over there. So perhaps we tweak some of the Infectio modifier settings. It could be, there's a bunch of different settings that it could be. I think if we change the search radius, well actually the search radius is fine. Maybe we include more particles in there. And let's press play again. There we go, bouncing along. Let's just check our mapping tab. It's using our noise. I think that's probably fine. It's looking pretty cool. There we go. Now, the density of all this, you know, up here and things, that still depends on the noise, and we're going to have to add in a few more over here. Now that is interesting. That I'm wondering if that's the noise texture is not letting us get to there. So let's try a slightly different seed. In the noise, that is, not the seed objects. I will add another seed object if I need to encourage it to go somewhere. There we go. I think we've actually stopped this one now. Yeah. So we can encourage these areas. Oh, that's actually going now. That's good. So we can actually encourage these areas with another seed object, or there's a few different techniques really. We could encourage change the noise, that kind of thing. Let's just start this one quite small and down here. Duplicate that one. We can start that just under the brow there. Maybe that'll help it kind of move up. And I'll return the noise. I quite like the way that noise was going. So let's just go back to our other seed. Across it goes. That is very quick at the moment. Yeah, we're almost getting full coverage. There's just one little bit down here that's not managed to get any. So we go for a last. And you can see how that was interactive there, because I actually press that. Let's put that in that corner over there. Nice. I definitely think that noise is too flat still. So let's give it a bit more contrast without... Of course, there's a bit of a balancing act here. I don't want it to stop all of a sudden the... Oh, there we go. That's pretty cool, though. It is slowing down our sim somewhat, but maybe we can tweak that out with the search radius. Go to object. Let's go to 15 units. So it's able to jump a little bit further. In fact, it can even jump over to other geometries here. That's looking pretty cool. Now remember, I mentioned earlier we're going to mesh this, and perhaps we'll need some kind of meshing operations to combine these things. I think we'll probably combine both the blue and the red, so it will be one continuous surface. Oh, we're so nearly there. Look, we've got this one area. Oh, that's actually missing a few particles perhaps. Got this one area over here, so I'm going to scale the noise down, and I'm just going to drop back our contrast just a touch. I'm using the clipping to... Let's go to 20% size. There we go. It's got a nice look to it. It is pretty fast, so we might want to slow it down somewhat. Because right now, that's affecting across the mesh really quickly. I mean, by, what is that? It's just over sort of 5 seconds. Yeah, that's completely filled the mesh. So let's slow it down. Jump into here. Let's drop that. Well, let's drop that 10 search radius back down now that we've got the noise a bit smaller. And that is a bit slower. Still, it fills these areas nice and quickly. That's within 2 seconds, so I think that's way too quick at the moment. But this area takes way longer, so it's a bit of a balancing act. So let's... I could use a different kind of noise, actually. So, because the noise is being referenced by our emitter, our color modifier, I'm actually going to create another noise, and we're going to call this one Infectio. Actually, we just call it search noise. There we go. Let's throw it on there. I'll just leave it on the UVs. That's not a problem. And let's change the type of noise that it is. Well, it's not to change the type. We could actually do something here where we actually utilize an animated noise to make sure that it it covers everything, or we could just use a different noise altogether. So maybe I grab like just a normal noise, make it quite low contrast, and let's attach that one. So this is now our search noise. So I'm going to drag that into there. It's called texture. The tag is reading the tag. So let's just go in and change the name of the tag. Let's call it search radius texture. Jump back to our Infectio, and you can see there that should be working nicely. We'll double check everything. It's going to depend a bit. We could animate the noise as well. Now that's a little trick that we could do. Let's just try some different seeds. I'm just looking at the radius here. There we go. That looks a little slower, but it's still moving quite fast. So maybe we need to drop the clipping right back down to 0. And that up. Looks cool though. So that's within 2 seconds. That is pretty fast. I do like the look that it's giving, but I think it might be propagating the surface too quickly. So just a balancing act. Keep balancing out these things. We could even drop the incubating multiplier as like a global multiplier, so it'll slow the whole thing down. But I think eventually it'll still reach the same level of coverage. So let's try that. You can see it's so much slower along these edges, but that might be quite nice for sort of a close-up shot. And there we go. It comes up the brow there. That's cool. Yeah, I think that's going to be our compromise, our balance point. Perfect. Okay, and then it's wrapping up around about this point, and I think perhaps we'll have the camera. This is the final moment where we lost our preview there. Maybe the noise, maybe my GPUs need some more texture memory. So there we go, and we'll align the camera up at the end here, like so. We'll play around with the cameras and stuff later on, but I'm pretty happy with that. That's essentially our mold growing on our surface. So the last thing is to actually mesh that. And what we can do for that is, because we're using separate groups, in fact, I'm going to go to the group and I'm going to display their radii using a circle display. If I just change our tag, it just makes sure that we can see that texture. There we go. Zoom in, and you can see that this radius is way too big. So let's drop it right down. Let's go for 2 on this one and 1 on this one. That's still a bit big, but we'll play around. That looks pretty cool. Yeah, I think the radius there is probably too large. So maybe we need to scale it down in the we could actually scale it down in the OpenVDB, but let me just drop this right down. Actually, I don't want to go too, let's do 0.7 or 0.8. 0.85. There we go. And then these, let's say 1.2. You tweak away, this might have different, parameters that you'll like. I quite like that. I want a differentiation between the scales, or the radii, I should say, because then I can have the leading edge be a little bit larger and it'll just make it look a touch more interesting, I think. Okay, so let's create an OpenVDB mesh for these. OpenVDB mesh. Now, the settings for this, they're going to probably vary depending on what you're doing, but I think we could drop the point radius right down. We could probably drop the voxel size right down as well. We don't need to mess around with this one. Threading options, not really a problem. But now we can actually drag the groups in. So let's just drag the blue group in. And if it doesn't refresh, just nudge the timeline. And let's actually turn off the display of our groups to squares. Go back to the beginning. And if I press play, you'll see our searching edge, our incubating particles, are now this leading edge here. That looks pretty cool. Even without filtering, that's not too bad. I think we probably want the radius of our OpenVDBMesher, or the voxel size, to be a bit less. Let's do let's just do a ratio of 2 there. just tweak away until you're happy with the base look, and then we can mess around a bit more with the individual settings of each group and things like that. So that's looking pretty cool though. I like that. And so we've got that one group in there. Now we can just drop the other group in. And there we go. We're starting to see what our mold is going to look like, propagating all across the surface in disgusting fashion. Now the mesh is a bit bobbly, and that's quite a common thing. Actually, we've lost our separation between the two groups is not very pronounced. So I might. What you can do is you don't actually need to change the sim at this point. You could actually just jump into the group itself, and you can actually scale the point radius down per object or per source. So let's drop that down. Let's do 75%. And now can you see there's a gap? There's a distinct change there where the red and the blues kind of meet. I don't want it to be too much because otherwise it'll look a bit silly. But it's quite a bobbly mesh. Now, if I view it in like a wireframe, if I hit NB, that's going to give us a display where we can see the mesh itself. That's quite dense. You can work with much denser meshes than this, but I think that's going to be fine for our purpose, especially once we've worked a little bit on the filtering. Now, the filtering, it really depends on what you're doing, but the filtering tends to have a bigger impact if your voxel size is higher. So we might need to just, if we went to a finer voxel size, you're going to need to add more filtering iterations. So we jump to the filters here, and what these do is they essentially filter the source voxels so they're smoother. Like this is a median operation. That's probably fine. And the other one I like to do on these kind of meshes is just a mean. And the mean I'm going to have actually do a few iterations. And there you go. Now we're getting a much smoother mesh. See that? Now, is that going to be a problem in terms of coverage? Potentially. So can you see how we've got these particles here are kind of getting filtered out because perhaps the voxel size is too high, or let's just double check. 0.6. Yeah, that's not too bad. The particle radius. Maybe we need to increase the number of particles. I'm not so sure about that just yet. Let's just try a bit more. What are we on this one? 0.2. Let's do 0.3. We can always give these a bit of variation as well. So separate them out. There we go. It's looking pretty cool. I like how it's looking nice and smooth, the actual mesh itself. So, and you can see it kind of pops that these moments where it searches and lurches forward. Now, the smoother the more particles you have and the smaller the search radius, the finer that motion will be. But because this is a mold, I kind of want it to look a little like a time lapse. So I'm kind of quite content to let it have a bit of step motion to it. But yeah, like I said, remember, it's not actually moving, it's just infecting, it's just moving the infection to a different particle. Okay, so this is actually getting some good coverage here. I just want to make sure that by the end of this, and if I turn the OpenVDBMesher off and just let the sim play out, get it further filled up, we can kind of test to see whether the final frame will have enough coverage. And we're actually going to create another element to this. So from these particles, so we're not just doing the Infectio, we're going to actually grow spores off this mold as well. So it's going to be furry and gross as well. So, but beautiful as well, of course. Nature is beautiful. And so let's turn our OpenVDBMesher back on. You might have to nudge it a frame to get it to recalculate. There we go. All right, so that's looking quite interesting. Now, if I hide our emitter, that'll hide the particles, and I think that's looking pretty good. And if I hide our geometry even, there we go. If we line that up nicely, you'll see. Now, it's obviously it's actually infected below there. That's not a problem though. Just a bit more interest. It's covered by the skull. There we go, and we line up, and there's our logo formed out of our disgusting mold. Cool. Or not, depending if you're having to clean that up. So here we go. I'm going to just NQ, which actually turns off textures. I'm going to hide that. And there we go. We can kind of get an idea of how this mold is going to look on the surface. And we'll work on the material and things like that later on. But for now, I'm pretty happy with how that's looking. Probably you could cache this right now, but like I said, we're going to do another operation and perhaps we'll cache everything all at once. But if you wanted to test the timing on this, now would be a good time to sort of cache it out and test it. But for now, I'm going to call this video a wrap, otherwise it'll go too long. And then we're going to go on to the next stage, which is actually adding spores growing off this mold as it grows itself. So it's kind of multi-level growth. All right, so I'll see you in the next video.